Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Talk with Maynard podcast. The Talk with Maynard podcast is a podcast about motivation, awareness, disabilities, world problems, and cars. I would have had this podcast out sooner, but I deleted some audio and video from it, so I had to re-record it. So I'm here re-recording this podcast, and I hope y'all enjoy it. In this week's podcast, I'll be discussing my top 10 favorite car sounds for the second time. So hopefully I can give you a little more information than I gave last time I recorded this video in this podcast. So I'll see if I can give you a little bit more information now that I've had more time to look some stuff up. But this podcast is going to be just like the other one. I'm going to just go for it, and hopefully it turns out good. So, let's get right into this podcast. Okay, the first few car engines on this list are going to be important for the rest of the podcast. These are some of my favorite sounding engines at the beginning, too. But it will give you information on the different types of engines and different things to expect later on in the podcast, because most of the engines on this list are derived from these first few engines that I got a lot of information on. So let's get started with my first favorite sounding engine. The first engine I have on this list that's my favorite sounding one is a pushrod 5.0 with glass packs. Specifically from the Fox Body Mustang, since Ugly Betty, our car, is a Fox Body Mustang with a pushrod 5.0 and glass pack mufflers, so it makes it really. That's probably why it's my favorite sound, one of my favorite sounding cars on this list, because we actually own it, and there's been a few YouTubers and a few people in our videos that claim that that's one of their favorite sounding engines too. But what makes the Fox Body Mustang's engine, or the engine, the pushrod 5.0 interesting, is that it is a pushrod engine. And I think pushrod engines have a very unique old school sound, and I really like the way they sound, especially through fairly open exhaust. So here's some information about pushrod engines, and then I'll give you some information about overhead cam engines too, because that way you know the difference between the two and why a pushrod engine is one of my favorites. Okay, so in a pushrod engine or an overhead valve engine, the camshaft sits between the cylinder heads of the engine, so the camshaft is directly between the cylinder heads and the engine. The crankshaft in an overhead valve or pushrod engine is connected to the camshaft with a chain or a gear. Most cars have a chain, but some higher-end cars like Ferraris and stuff had gears, so to work it. But so when the crankshaft turns, the camshaft follows. That's why the gears are connected. If the crankshaft is turned without the camshaft, you have some serious problems. So in an overhead valve engine or a pushrod engine, this is where it gets its name. When the camshaft turns, a lifter pushes a pushrod that opens and closes the engine's valves. So there's literally a rod that pushes on the valve to open and close them, and that's how your engine gets air and fuel inside. So the pushrod pushes it open, and that's how it works, and that's why it's called a pushrod engine, because you literally have a rod in the engine pushing on the man, brain fart. You have a pushrod pushing on the valve, so that's why it's called a pushrod engine. So that's why it's called that. The valves rest on top of the engine and lifting them to bring in airflow and push out exhaust. requires the use of a pushrod. So it's basically just a repeat of what I just got through saying. And it's to let air flow in and push exhaust gases out. It don't have anything to do with fuel. I was wrong on my part. Overhead valve engines, pushrod engines, are still being used in most GMC and Chevy vehicles, but most manufacturers have moved to overhead cam designs, which is what most new engines are, and I'll get into overhead cam engines here in a second, so you know how it works. But honestly, after the pushrod engines aren't quite as smooth. They run a little rougher, and that's what gives them the cool sound that most people like about pushrod engines. Okay, let's move into overhead cam engines, just so you know what the difference is here. Overhead cam engines have two important styles. They have single and double overhead cam designs. Single overhead cam engines have one crankshaft that's responsible for intake and exhaust valves. So it has only one camshaft. That's for intake and exhaust, only one. In a double overhead cam engine, though, there's two camshafts in each cylinder head, and that is what one operates the intake and the other operates the exhaust valves. And double overhead cam is the most efficient version. The camshafts in an overhead cam engine become the highest point on the individual cylinder heads in the block, and most modern engines are double overhead cam these days. The biggest on here it says the biggest advantage for overhead cam engines is variable valve timing. This improves fuel efficiency and power, and it allows for it doesn't impact your engine as negatively. So that's what's important about variable valve timing. And car companies often treat this as a big deal. You often hear VTEC or TI-VCT, or all the other ways people have said it. They're really proud of their variable valve timing and how it works and gives more power depending on what RPM you're in and all that stuff. The angle of the valves, exhaust valves, allow for improved breathing and increased power. There's more of an angle there. This isn't really an option in overhead valve engines, so it's only an option in overhead cam engines. So the reason why it sounds so good, and to put it simply, a pushrod engine is constantly going up and down and consists of a change in direction, and it creates extra noise because of reciprocating motion. An overhead cam engine eliminates push rods by having either the rocker arm or the valve itself running directly off the camshaft. So overhead cam engines are much more efficient, but they don't have that cool sound that is the reason I like a push rod engine. And the last thing about the 5.0 push rod engine that I like our car is that as the exhaust, we have a glass pack exhaust in our car, and that makes it sounds louder, and it just sounds good to me. So here's some information on a glass pack. A glass pack is a type of muffler, and exhaust passes straight through the center of it. The basic design of a glass pack is a tube inside a tube, and the inner tube is enlarged or swollen in the middle, and it's surrounded by fiberglass. And the fiberglass is what is supposed to reduce the noise. But glass packs are an old, simple, and relatively inexpensive muffler, and they're effective at reducing back pressure, but they don't muffle much noise. So that's why we like the way it sounds, because it don't muffle much noise. and it makes it sound good. And some more information on glass packs. You can actually make glass packs louder by freezing the fiberglass and breaking it up. That makes it louder. And they also really are inexpensive. Our car, Ugly Betty, has the cheapest of glass packs we could find. And I tell you, it makes it sound really good. But anyway, that's the first favorite engine on this list. It's the Pushard 5.0 with glass packs, especially in the Volkswagen Mustang. So moving on to my second favorite engine, which is pretty special too. It's the only one like it on the list. The second favorite engine is the, I probably have the year wrong, but the 2018 Dodge Demon engine. It's an 808 horsepower supercharged 6.2 liter Hemi V8. And I really like the way this engine sounds because Hemi engines sound good all the time. And then I also like the sound of a supercharger, which is something that the Dodge Demon has. So here's some information on a Hemi. A Hemi is an engine with a hemispherical combustion chamber. It consists of dome-shaped cylinders and piston tops. Hence the name Hemi, or hemispherical. Hemispherical refers to the half sphere, so the piston tops must be rounded in order to properly fit within the cylinders. So that's just basically a recap on what I just said. With a smaller surface area than typical flathead engine designs, less heat can escape. And when less heat can escape, pressure goes up and power goes up. And usually you think you want to keep your engine cool. Well, this is designed, during this process, it's designed to have more heat, so there's more energy. And more energy means more power, so that's why the energy is so important. Valves are less restricted in a Hemi engine, so they can be larger in order to allow for more airflow, whether that's bringing cool air in or sending exhaust gases out. Everyone knows that more fuel and more air equals more power, so that's one of the perks to a Hemi engine. And then in a Hemi engine, the spark plugs provide better ignition combustion due to their position within the chamber. All these things differentiate a Hemi from your regular flat top engine designs. And all this contributes to the Hemi's power. And all this extra stuff with a Hemi, I just think they sound really good. They're usually a deeper sounding engine. They sound like they're ready to terrorize the town every time you hear one. But that's only part of the reason why I like the way the Dodge Demon engine sounds. The second part is a supercharger, specifically the twin-screw supercharger that the Dodge Demon uses. So here's some information on twin-screw superchargers, why they make the noise they do, and why I like it. A twin-screw supercharger operates by pulling air through a pair of lobes that resemble a set of worm gears. The air inside a twin-screw supercharger is trapped in pockets created by the rotor lobes. So that's how the air gets into it. A twin-screw supercharger compresses the air inside the rotor housing. That's because the rotors have a conical taper, which means the air pockets decrease in size as air moves from the fill side to the discharge side. So the air is getting more and more compacted, and the more compact the air is, the more pressure there is. As these air pockets squeeze into smaller space, this makes the twin-screw superchargers more efficient because the air is squeezed down before it enters the engine. The compressed air exiting the discharge outlet creates a whine or whistle that must be subdued with noise suppression techniques. So that's why we like the way a supercharger sounds. Like, it has this whining, whistling sound that is just one of the coolest sounds you'll ever hear. And it says you have to use noise suppression techniques. Well, when the Dodge Demon came out, they specifically reduced some of these noise suppression techniques to make the car lighter and more efficient and go faster, so they got rid of it, so it really makes a lot of noise. And that is the main reason why we like the way the Dodge Demon sounds. So that's my second favorite engine, the 2018 Dodge Demon, the 6.2 liter Hemi supercharged engine. Okay, let's move on to my third favorite engine, which is also pretty special. And the way this engine works will show up several times in this podcast. So, my next favorite engine is the Mustang GT350R. It's a 5.2 liter Voodoo V8 with a flat plane crank. The reason why this engine is so special is because of the flat plane crank. It's the first Mustang that Ford ever made with a flat plane crank. Sorry if you can hear a noise in the background. I don't have a studio or anything, so I'm doing the best I can with what I got. So what makes the engine so important is it has a flat plane crankshaft. It's the first time it was used in the Mustang. That's why it's such a big deal. The pistons and connecting rods in conventional cross-plane V8s attach to the crankshaft at 90-degree intervals, but a flat-plane crank V8 has them at every 180 degrees, separating the exhaust pulses of each bank of cylinders and improving overall airflow. So it has way more airflow, and the exhaust pulses are separated more and are more evenly separated, allowing for a different sound. All of this allows the GT350's redline to be 8,250 RPM, generating an insane exhaust note. That's the highest RPM engine that has ever been in a Mustang, and it makes an insane exhaust note, which is why I like it. The GT350R sounds a little different than most flat plane crank engines because the design is a little different, and they use a more American-style exhaust to make a more rough sounding V8 exhaust note, and it gives it a really unique sound. But the information from this engine will be used throughout the rest of this podcast. So my next favorite engine, I don't have really much information on it, but is the Lamborghini Huracan Evo engine. It's a 5.2 liter naturally aspirated V10 with a flat plane crank. And I just think it sounds really good. It's really loud, has a lot of crackles and pops, and it sounds really good. Lamborghini is known for amazing sounding V10s and V12s, so that's one of my favorites. And then the next one on here is also a Lamborghini. It's one of my favorite sounding cars. It has a 6.5 liter naturally aspirated V12 with a flat plane crank, and I specifically like it with the Fabspeed exhaust. And to me, this is actually the best sounding car on this list, but it couldn't be at the top of the list because it has an aftermarket exhaust, and it's kind of cheating a little bit, I think. So this sounds really good with the aftermarket exhaust, and it's probably one of the best sounding things on this list. And there ain't much to say about it. I don't have a whole lot of information there, but it's one of my favorites. Okay, so that gets me through the first 5 favorite engines on this list, favorite sounding engines. It's pretty interesting, and a lot of this information will be used throughout the second half of this podcast. So here is a quick compilation of all of the engines in the first 5 slots on this list, and so you can hear what they sound like and why I like them so much. I tried to find some pretty cool videos, so enjoy. And after the compilation is over, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back for the second half. So here you go. Enjoy these great sounding engines. The Fox Body Mustang. The 2018 Dodge Demon. The 2017 Mustang Jensen 350R. The Lamborghini Huracan Evo. The Lamborghini Murcielago LP640. Okay, everyone, we're back with the second half of this podcast. I hope you enjoyed that compilation of engine sounds. I know I thought they all sounded great. I hope you liked them too. And let's move right into the second half of the podcast. And these are my top 5 favorite engines of all time. Favorite sound engines. So we'll kick this next section off with the Ferrari 812 Superfast. It has a 6.5 liter naturally aspirated flat plane crank V12. I don't have a whole lot of information on it, but trust me when I say it's one of the greatest sounding Ferrari engines of all time, and that says a lot because Ferrari is known for great sounding engines. It just has a really high pitched exhaust note. It pops and crackles and revs, and it's so amazing. And I wish I had more information to give you, but Ferrari's kind of secretive on some of their information too, so there wasn't a whole lot I could find out other than it sounds really good. So that moves me on to the second engine, and I actually have some information on this one, and it's really, a lot of people say, the best engine of all time. And the car I'm talking about is the Porsche Carrera GT. It has a 5.7 liter naturally aspirated flat plane crank V10, and it is one of the all-time greatest sounding engines ever. The engine was originally derived for F1 and Le Mans. Porsche designed the engine for Formula 1. But Formula 1 rules changed and they required smaller engines. So they couldn't use the V10 for Formula 1. And so they're like, well, what else can we use the V10 for? So then they tried it for their Le Mans car. But about the time they tried it out there, the rules changed for that race too. So Porsche was like, well, what are we going to put this amazing race car engine in? And they were thinking about it, couldn't figure out what they wanted to do. And they finally decided on making a production road car with the engine, which is insane to think that they even thought to do that with this race engine. You don't hear that happening very often. So they're like, we're going to put it in a road car. And they wanted to build the greatest road car of all time when they did it. So what's interesting about this engine is each bank of cylinders has its own exhaust system, which allows for the unique sound, and it has primary and main catalytic converters, which change the sound a lot too. It makes it a little quieter. I wish it was a little louder, but it still sounds really good. The engine has a cross-flow system that cools each cylinder individually to keep the engine temperature constant, so it can be run longer at higher RPMs on racetracks. And what is really interesting about the engine is the concept car for the Carrera GT originally had a 5.5 liter V10 with less power. So what did Porsche do? They're like, we're going to put a bigger engine in it with even more power. And you never hear of a production car, a concept car with a smaller engine than a production car. They always do something crazy in the concept cars. But that wasn't the case this time, and it made one of the most insane cars ever. And two interesting facts about the Carrera GT. One is, I'm sure everyone knows, the Carrera GT was the car that Paul Walker was killed in. And there's a few reasons for this. One was the carelessness. You really have to know what you're doing when you drive this car. And the second thing is the Porsche Carrera GT came with not very good tires. They were pretty bad, actually, to begin with. And then the tires on the car that crashed were old on top of it. So a tire blowout caused the whole wreck, if I remember right. And carelessness, those two things there. And it just crashed because of these reasons. And the Carrera GT, ever since then, has been known as one of the most dangerous cars ever because it don't have any driver's aids on top of the bad tires. So it's known as one of the most dangerous cars ever, and one of the most best-sounding cars in the world. And so you might be wondering, what outdoes the Carrera GT? If it was the greatest engine of all time, who can make a better sound engine? Well, entering the ring next is the Lexus LFA engine. It's the 1LRGUE 4.8 liter flat plane crank V10. And it just sounds so awesome. It's one of the most amazing sounding cars in the world. I know I've said that a few times now, but it really is. What's interesting about the 1LRGUE engine is it was constructed from aluminum, magnesium, and titanium alloys. The dimensions of the engine were equivalent to that of a traditional V8, so a pretty good sized engine, but it was as light as a conventional V6, which is a pretty small engine, and that is crazy that they made such a big engine so light, and it's thanks to the alloys and metals they used. The moving parts were manufactured for real high tolerances. Engines have pretty tight tolerances already, and to think that they made them even tighter is really crazy. There's a 72-degree angle between each mega cylinders, which is wider in most V formations, for balancing the primary and secondary movements of the internals for smooth operation. So it also ran incredibly smooth for an engine. And this focus on low inertia and low friction enabled the V10 to rev to 9,000 RPM. That is in just 0.6 of a second. That is incredibly insane. And that's also only 1,000 RPM less than your normal F1 car, which is crazy in a regular road car. A few more interesting facts about this engine is Lexus partnered with Yamaha, Yamaha, to make this engine. And if you know anything about Yamahas, they make musical instruments, and they actually used their music department to tune the engine like an instrument in the exhaust, so it sounded as good as it could possibly sound. They really focused on making this one of the best sounding engines in the world. They had tuners and they had musicians and everything work on the engine and exhaust in this car to make it sound as great as it does. So That is just an insane sound engine. And the only reason why I think the next two cars surpass the LFA is because they're not road cars at all. And they're not race cars either, which is insane to think. Pardon me for using the word insane and crazy a lot, because these are insane and crazy engines. So the next car on my list is a Ferrari FXXK Evo. It has a 6.2 liter naturally aspirated flat plane crank V12. And it's a great sound engine. It was actually in the LaFerrari, which is already a good sounding car, and take away most of the exhaust and you really have a good sound car. The engine in this car made 848 horsepower and had an F1 electric curve system, adding another 187 horsepower. I believe that's about 1,050 horsepower, and you can use all that power in short bursts, which is really crazy. And what's interesting about the FXXK Evo is it's neither a road car or a race car. It doesn't fit into any category at all, and technically it's legal for the road and illegal for racing on racetracks. And that's wild to think that. And it sounds so good. It's really a crazy sounding engine, and I really like the way it sounds. And that is number 9 on my list. And I tell you what, number 10 is the craziest sounding car I've heard on the entire planet ever. And the car I'm talking about is the Aston Martin Vulcan with its 7 liter naturally aspirated flat plane crank V12. And it just sounds so crazy. A lot of people say it's like an F1 car and a screaming banshee put together, and I would have to say that's pretty accurate. It sounds really good. I don't have a whole lot of information on it. The only information I have is the engine's based on 2 British Ford Mondeo engines. So it's 2 not very great V6 engines, and originally it was kind of like put together with duct tape and bubble gum, these 2 engines. It's been tuned over time, but it just sounds really, really crazy, and who cares if it's 2 little bitty V6 engines? When it sounds like that, it is crazy. So anyway, that is my top 5 favorite engines in this part of the podcast. I tell you what, I got some pretty interesting vehicles on here and some pretty great sounding engines. And so for your enjoyment, here's another compilation of car engines. And I tell you what, this is going to be one of the best sounding symphonies of car engines you ever heard in this part of the video. So here's the compilation, and when we get, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back with the next segment. So enjoy. The Ferrari 812 Superfast. The Porsche Carrera GT. The Lexus LFA. Ferrari FXXK Evo. The Aston Martin Vulcan. Okay everyone, I'm back with the next segment. This segment is called the Guess That Car Sound segment. And this is a segment where I pick out a car, my dad picks out a car, and the other person guesses to see what it is. And so here is the Guess the Car Sound segment. And this time I'm going to give you a car sound. I'll provide a sound, and you can guess what the car is in the comments. And I hope I can find a pretty good sounding engine for us listeners, since it's all about that. So here's the clip of the engine. I hope you can guess it. Turn your volume down now. Your ears will explode. This is your fair warning. Turn your volume down now. Your ears will explode. This is your fair warning. Anyway, that's it. That's the clip. Hopefully you can guess it in the comments. I'll let you know if you're right or wrong. And I'm sure it'll be fairly easy to guess. But we'll see. My voice is starting to go out. But yeah, you can leave a guess in the comments below. So that brings me to the next segment, the Friday wrap-up segment, where I'll just tell you a little bit about what I've been doing lately. Lately, I've been trying to get the Project Maynard cruise put together. So I've been doing that. I've been making quotes and videos. I'm going to start working on a special project pretty soon that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. I'm also going to be working on new apparel. So I'll be checking Project Maynard all the social media platforms. And I'll be posting all the new stuff that I'm doing. So that is what I have for Friday wrap-up. And that moves us right into the closing. So that's all I have for you this time. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about my favorite sounding engines. Be sure to follow Project Maynard on Facebook at Project Maynard. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Project Maynard. Be sure to follow us on YouTube by searching Project Maynard and on Twitter at Project Maynard1. That's all I have for you this time. Thank you for watching.